What's up, everybody? Matt Bell here with Electric Violin Shop. I do want to tell you about my shirt. Let me lower these cameras down a wee bit, yeah? How you like that? Rockstar Violinist, we got one right now. Raz is here. The Rockstar Violinist podcast is the podcast that we host here from the Electric Violin Shop, and the idea is that there's a lot of really good music happening out there right now. A lot of really cool people doing creative and awesome stuff with violins, and we think you should know about it. So the Rockstar Violinist podcast, I think we're on episode like 41 or 42 or something. We started with Mark Wood because I'm a rockstar violinist. Who else are you going to start with but Mark Wood? So we started with Mark Wood, and we've gone through Evan Garr, who's a jazz guy, and Rachel Grace, who's EDM, and Raz, who does everything, Zach Brock, who's a jazz guy, Ross Holmes is a folk and country and Americana guy, through Earl Manian is a heavy metal guy, Joe Denizon's a prog rock guy. Just there's some amazing players out there doing really cool stuff. So check out the Rockstar Violinist podcast. It's on iTunes, it's on Google Play, it's on Stitcher, soundcloud.com/rockstarviolinist. But since I'm wearing the shirt, this is not a one-off. We've got these shirts for sale on our website right now. You can go to electricviolinshop.com. You can get you one. And yeah, they're fantastic. It's they're 100% cotton, but we didn't get like the cheap like throwdown. We didn't get like the cheap throwdown shirts. These are nice. They're kind of like fitted a little bit. They feel nice. You're gonna want to wear this thing when you go to the beach. Like if you ever get married, it might be something appropriate to wear in that situation. It's a good shirt. It's a really nice shirt. Yeah, my wife is watching. She actually made the original one, which is a one-off. You guys can't have that. The violin's really sparkly. And you can't have the sparkly one. That one's mine. Hey, what's up, Ernesto? Hope you guys are doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about 5-string violins. TwoSet, y'all listening? It's a thing. It is. It's a thing. We have a little bit of fun with those guys. It's sacrilegious, I know, but sacrilege is what we do best around here, because you can't make omelets without sidewalks or something. I don't know. Whatever. It's a mixed metaphor at best. So, oh, Raz, I'm so glad you got that. Awesome. If you guys saw the Spectra violin that we did a couple of weeks ago, the one that lights up all crazy, Raz got the first one. She was actually a little bit... I want to talk to you guys about history, right? So let's go back to, I don't know, say like the 1500s. That was a while back. If we go back to the 1500s, that's really the first time that like the violin as we know it sort of appeared in history. In the mid-1500s, Amati, there were some issues before that. They were sort of like 3-string instruments. I mean, there have been string instruments ever since we figured out that cheap do stuff. But anyway, so they started, the 4-string violin sort of started to really happen in the mid-1500s. Then there were some guys in the 1600s that were making these things you may have heard of. Guarneri, Stradivari were doing 1600s, 1700s. But the instruments they were making were not like the instruments we have today. In fact, the Strads and Guarneris that exist today have all been retrofitted with different necks. The neck angles were different on those. The fingerboards were shorter, and they had different strings. They were using actual gut strings. Now, sometimes you can use a gut core string now, but most of them are synthetic. So the strings have changed. Actually, the venues got bigger and bigger. As string instruments started playing really small, like basically chamber music type sizes. As the venues got bigger and bigger, the instruments had to change. Actually, speaking of the Rockstar Violinist podcast, the episode with Rudolf Haken, he is a professor at the University of Illinois. He does a fantastic job of explaining the trajectory of innovation in string instruments and why venues and the music and the instruments, they all sort of changed together, and they sort of fed off of each other. As the venues got bigger and the audiences grew and the music grew in popularity, there was more music written for larger venues, and gosh, now we can't hear one violin up there, so maybe we put two violins, and maybe they play together sometimes, but maybe they'll play separately. And so all these things sort of drove and worked together as that evolution happened. Okay, fast forward to 1960s, when we started seeing 5-string violins appear in country music. Okay, so one of the reasons that the 5-string violin didn't really become a thing in classical music times, as they were writing a lot of this literature, is because the body of the instrument, which has to amplify the strings, the relationship between the body and the strings that they had at the time, these bodies could not reproduce the power needed for a low C string and still have the clarity that you need on an E string. Okay, so then they said, well, let's just have two different instruments. If we need the low C, then we'll have a viola that's a bigger body, a longer neck, and then we'll have the violin for covering that high fifth, the high E string. So they ended up having two different instruments because of the technology that was holding them back. We've got better strings now, and especially now that we've got amplification, I don't rely on the body of the instrument in an amplified setting to reproduce a whole lot of the sound. I can pick up an amp to do that. So now I can go up to 6, 7, 8, 9 strings on a violin if my hand's big enough, and the speaker doesn't care. The pickup doesn't care. The pickup can go all the way down to way below what a human ear can hear. So as technology changes and the string technology changes, we are now able to produce 5 and 6 and 7 string violins that you get all that range in one instrument, in one playable instrument. So if we are, you guys are watching this on the internet, we're totally cool with technology and the world changing as technology changes. Why would we not be a thing, right? If you are a purely classical person, there is still maybe a reason for you to own a 5-string violin. If you're a working musician, you get called to do chamber music gig or something. If you have a 5-string violin, you can take viola jobs. Okay, maybe this doesn't sound quite as bottom end heavy as a viola. But frankly, you can probably get paid to read an alto clef chart on a 5-string violin, and very, very few people in your audience are going to know or care. Your accountant is definitely not going to care, okay? So it's a thing in a classical world. If you are a violinist and a violist, which a lot of excellent, excellent violinists are also violists, and I could give you a list of names, but that's fine. We like to make viola jokes too, but some fantastic players are also violists. And I've also heard some violists that have stomped most violinists in a room, so we'll go easy on the viola jokes here. But if you are a classical player, it's nice to have a 5-string violin handy so that you can take some of those viola jobs when they come by and you don't have to carry two different instruments. The other thing for me, I feel like I can hear a difference in tone because of that sympathetic resonance of that C string down there. Say I'm doing, playing C on the G string. I can see it here, and I can feel that C string moving, and I can hear it. So I feel like there's a low end richness that you get from a 5-string that you don't get from a 4-string, even if you never play that C string, even if you're just playing classical literature. I think there's a richness that you get from that C string that you don't get on a 4-string instrument. So there is a bit of a tone improvement, I think. For improvisers, obviously, being able to reach that low register is so nice, especially if you're on a gig, say a church gig where they change keys a lot and maybe the singer's voice is worn out after 2 or 3 services this weekend. And he goes, bro, I'm gonna capo this thing down 1. And you're like, yeah, we were already in G, so now we're in F sharp. And now I have to not only do I have to transpose, I got to rethink all my parts because I ran out of string. So it is a nice thing to have that extra, that range there if you're an improviser for sure. So many improvisers I know have gone to 5 strings and never looked back. In fact, we probably sell at least as many 5s and maybe more than we do 4 strings. Pretty much every manufacturer that we deal with makes a 5-string violin, which tells you this is the thing. People are buying these things. Pretty much every manufacturer we work with makes a 5. Okay. What was the other thing? Oh, I was going to say maybe there's some reasons to not get a 5. If you're trying to decide, hey, do I want a 5-string? Do I not want a 5-string? So on the pro side of the thing, you've got, for an improviser, you've got extended range. For a classical player, you can pick up violin and viola jobs with one instrument. You've got a little bit more tone, a little more richness and bottom end because of that C string sitting there shaking. The other nice thing too, even if you're playing 4-string literature, I can just shift up, or I can use 4-string on 4th finger on the C string, and now I can vibrato that G. So even if I never need to go down to my C string for sheet music reasons, you know, maybe it's nice to just, right? Yeah, Corey makes a great point too. As an educator, it's nice to have a 5-string because you can demonstrate violin viola parts, and if you have a octave pedal, you can cover all your cello parts with a 5-string violin too. And that's a good point. Somebody talks about if you get small hands, and you know you're a violist, but you're like, man, it's just 16-inch viola's big. Basically, you've got a 14-inch viola here, just a viola with a high E. So those are all pro reasons to get a 5-string, but in the spirit of fairness and balance, let's talk about maybe some reasons you would not want a 5-string. So basically what happens is, in my preview, I was talking about this, and I've got an engineering degree. I can't believe my math was that bad. I was talking about when you've got a 4-string violin and you go to a wider neck, it's you wouldn't want to go just 25% wider, but it's not 25%, it's 33%, right? Because we're actually counting the gaps between the strings. There's a gap between E and A, that's 1. A gap between A and D, that's 2. A gap between D and G, that's 3. So I've got 3 spaces between strings. When I go to a 5-string, I now have 4 spaces between strings, which means that this neck would need to be 33% wider if I was just going to scale it up, right? So my nut was going to be 33% wider, the bridge, and we'll not account for the little pieces on the edge here, right? We have to make assumptions, right? In physics, they're always like, yeah, so we've got this ball falling. Assume a spherical, frictionless chicken falling off the roof. That was always my favorite. The spherical, frictionless chicken. So yeah, we're gonna pretend that the little space outside the strings doesn't exist. We would just say that if we're just scale this up, it would be 33% wider if we just went to a 5-string neck from a 4-string neck. Well, that's big. Going a third again is wide. That could be an issue. So what happens is each manufacturer sort of makes different compromises. We'll talk about some dimensions here near the end of this live stream. Each manufacturer makes different compromises on how they spread the nut out and how they spread the bridge out, fingerboard, neck width, all these different things. So what you end up with in a 5-string is that your string spacing is a little bit tighter than it is with a 4-string. The necks are a little bit wider, and the angles are a little different too. So usually in a 4-string, I'm used to I'm used to diving for that G string because it's a little bigger and it takes a little more power to move it, right? So, well, if I've got a 5-string and I'm used to diving for a G, I'm going to get in the way. I'm going to hit that C by accident. Depending on what key I'm in, that could be really bad. So you do have to get a little bit used to, the angles can be a little bit tighter. I feel like they're not much different, but I've been playing a 5-string for a whole lot of years. I feel with like maybe 6, 8, 10 hours on a 5-string, which for a lot of you guys is like a couple days in the practice room, that's going to feel, it's going to pretty much feel like home to you. And switching back and forth between 4 and 5 is not that big a deal, honestly. If, you know, if you got two cars, if you got a car and your spouse has a car, and you drive your car most of the time, then you get in your spouse's car or your partner's car to drive somewhere. It's like for a minute, it's like, oh, hey, this is different. Like the gear shifts in the wrong place or whatever. But once you've been driving it, like you've gotten to the store, by then it sort of just feels like a regular car. And it's the same kind of thing with a 4 and a 5. Once you've gotten several hours on a 5-string instrument, switching back and forth between 4-string and 5-string, it's really not that big. For me, it's actually harder to go to a 4-string as an improviser because I'm always reaching for that C, expecting it to be there because I've got so much experience on that 5-string. So yeah, the neck angles or the angles are a little bit tighter. The string spacing is a little bit tighter. And you know, if that's a thing that really bothers you, then maybe the 5-string isn't for you. Okay, there's some fantastic players. Ross Holmes is one. He's out with Nitty Gritty Dirt Band right now. He plays a 4. He's had access to 5s. He's played 5s and went, not for me. And then Zach Brock is another guy. He's out with Snarky Puppy at the moment. If you haven't seen those guys, oh my goodness, have I got something for you and seen them. Zach used to play a 5-string and went back to a 4 because he just went, I feel like I don't need it. I had that C string and it was just kind of in my way. So it's totally legit to say, hey, I've tried a 5 and I don't want it. But I will say from experience here at the shop that probably 90% of the people who try a 5-string with an open mind, like, hey, I think I might want this, and I'm going to put a little time in to make this thing feel right. Most of them that I talk to are like, bro, I'm never going back to a 4-string. I can't live without that C. So, yeah, that's just, that's some things to think about. Maybe why you might want a 5, why you might not want a 5, okay? The angles are a little different. On some of the bridges, like I said, pretty much every manufacturer that we carry makes a 5-string violin. Some of the bridges we can alter, like this one on the Realist. This is just, it's a regular wooden bridge. So if we wanted to move that C string maybe out a little tiny hair or move it down a little bit to allow you to dive into the G string more, then this bridge can be altered a little bit for that. If you're using a bridge like the Starfish bridge, this one, because it's sort of one piece, it's a little harder to jack with this one. It can be done. This one can be. The Barbera bridge cannot be adjusted. Curvature on this bridge, I mean, in theory, you could change it if you wanted to build the thing up, right? I mean, it has been done, but it's a really big deal to modify a Barbera bridge. So, yeah, some 5-strings can be modified, some can't. Yeah, and okay, so that's another thing. On the E string is moved over just a little bit. So your bow, you know, you're seeing my angle of my bow here, A string, E string. On a 4-string, my E might be here, right? On a 5-string, my E's a little more string, it's down a little bit. And if you're chopping a lot, it could be where maybe I'm hitting the body. It's honestly, it's not that big a deal. I really don't notice it that much. But that's, yeah, your E string does move. Those angles do change a little tiny bit. For most people, the standard range is worth a little bit of inconvenience and a little bit of a learning curve. For some people, it's not, and that's fine. It's cool either way. Whatever. It doesn't hurt my feelings if you're stuck in old strings. I think I did talk about this before. I did a preview video of this before, and I can't remember whether I covered it here or not. But do not buy a C string from a viola to put on your 5-string violin. It's going to intonate all wrong. You're trying to, you might be in tune when it's open, but when you go to play fifths, it's not going to be in tune. So they do make Violin C strings. Okay, D'Addario with their NS Electric line and the Helicore line make a Violin C. Doble makes a Violin C, Galley makes a Violin C, Parastro, the Tonica, they actually use a short string, short scale viola. They call it a short scale viola, but it's designed for the violin. Sensicore makes a Violin C, Wood Violins has a Violin C, Tomastic Visions has a Violin C, Vision, singular, plural, whatever, Visi. Yeah, Tomastic Vision makes a Violin C. So if you do have a 5-string violin, don't go buy a Viola C, buy a Violin C. It's actually a thing. It's a real thing. So yes. Two other things I want to cover. We did talk about that this is essentially, it is a violin, and the reason it's a violin is because it's the same size as a violin. The dimensions are violin dimensions. Okay, the scale length is a violin scale length. So it's not a violinola, it's a violin. It's a 5-string violin. There is a 5-string viola. Okay, I'll show you. This is a Glasser 5-string viola. Different instruments, right? Viola, violin, different size. This is a 5-string viola. This one is actually strung with a high E. So this is basically, it's about a half a step flat, but that's cool. So this is a 5-string viola with a high E. So careful violinists, you better watch that mouth. A viola player may come and swipe your gig. You might find out that they're better players than you think. Or because of the electronics and all that, we don't have to rely on the body of this instrument to reproduce all those low frequencies. We're using the electronics. They can actually, the word I'm looking for is string. They can string this violin, viola, my goodness, take two. They can string this viola either E to C or A to F. So they could still play viola parts, A, D, G, C, right? And then put a low F. Will from Black Violin has a 5-string viola with a low F. And I know he uses it for laying down beats and stuff when they're on stage doing improv stuff. And that low F is thunderous. It sounds so good. It sounds so good. Okay? So violas, you're not left out. They do make 5-string violas. Like I said, you can string with a high E, and you violas can shut them violinists up by stealing their gigs. Or you can put a low F on there, and you can get way down into cello territory, okay? Cellists are also not to be left out. Cellists can get 5-string cellos. I'm looking at a Zeta 5-string. But if you turn around, they're over there. Okay. And then cellos can do the same thing violas can. They can do either a high E or a low F, or if you're NS Design makes a 6-string cello, which gets the high E and the low F. Boom! How you like that? Pretty cool. So, yeah, the last thing I want to talk about before I get into dimensions, and we'll get to this, Stephen. Yeah, well, I mean, Bach was hip, man. I don't know if you guys have done a lot of, if any of you guys are like music theory geeks, but you start studying Bach stuff, Bach was like pushing into some jazz territory way back in the day. 200 years, 100 years before jazz was really a thing. Bach was hip, dude. Yeah, 5-string cello. Yeah, there's 6-string cellos as well. So I do want to talk about notation, because that's the thing that people ask, well, a 5-string violin, how do you write the music for that? I've seen, I don't really read much in my world. Most of my world is improv. But Joe Denizon has written some stuff. Gosh, I'm going to start forgetting. David Wallace has written some stuff. David Wallace is head of the string department at Berkeley. He's actually a violist who will smoke you on the violin anyway. So again, like the viola jokes. He has written some stuff. There have been a number of people that have written things for extended range violin or viola. And there's sort of 3 ways that they'll notate that. They can do it in treble, just with ledger lines. I mean, we read ledger lines out the top of the page on first violin. Nobody thinks twice about reading the ledger lines when they're playing up here in like dog whistle territory. So why would we care about reading some ledger lines below the staff? I mean, all you have to do is practice doing that. It's not that big a deal. So they can write it just treble clef with ledger line. Sometimes I've seen what Joe usually does, because he's also a violist. Joe will notate his in treble clef, and then he'll switch to alto clef when he goes low. I can't read alto clef. It was never a thing for me. But I used to sing in a choir and play piano, so I learned how to read bass clef. So I've seen that done too, where they'll just write it in dual ledgers as if it's piano music, and when they need to go below G or whatever, or C, middle C, they'll just switch to bass clef. Fortunately, with today's software and stuff, a lot of times you're not even getting like stuff on paper, like paper. My goodness, what's that? You know, a lot of times it's just it's you know, it's digital. So you could change it. If you don't like reading alto clef, you can just change it in your font. Yeah, you had to learn all 4 clefs, but you're smart. I'm just trying. That's why I improv, because I'm not that smart. So anyway, that's what's going on with 5-string violins. They're legit. They're a thing. I know TwoSet's funny, and you know, they've got hilarious accents because they're from Australia. Yeah, and the whole sacrilegious thing, it's cute and it's funny, right? But it is a real thing that people play and make real money with, and real cool music. So, you know, dismissing all that is, you know, hilarious, but not productive. So here's what I did. I mentioned the engineering degree. Look at this. I made a spreadsheet, everybody. Very proud of myself. I'd not made a spreadsheet in a very long time. Had to put my, my cool engineering glasses and my pocket protector on. So basically what I did is I see spaces between strings. If we're going to go to 5 and we just go 33% wider on the neck, all right, so that's, I can calculate that times 1.33, 33. Then I've got a projected dimension for my neck on the instrument. And so I took 3 measurements from a 4-string violin. I measured, let's grab a 4 just for fun, all right? I measured the distance from the outside of the G string to the outside of the E string, okay, at the nut. So that's 1 dimension. With me? All right. And then, oh, thank you. Then I measured the distance from the outside of the G string to the outside of the E string at the bridge. Still with me? Good. Then I measured the width of the neck at the nut. So I got 3 dimensions. The string width at the nut, string width at the bridge, and then how big is this neck up here where I got to put my hand, right? So those 3 dimensions. And then I look at what are those 3 dimensions for a bunch of different instruments, and then compare those actual dimensions in millimeters to what my projected 1.33 time neck would be. Does that make sense? So I measure a 4-string. I say if I just went 33% wider, what would my dimensions be? And then I measure some actual violins and say, how do those compare to this hypothetical 33% bigger neck? Okay, so we looked at a Jordan, we looked at a Wood Stingray, a Cantini, NS Design, Aurora, Realist, a Yamaha, a 3D Vari. That's more than one 3D Various. A Glasser, a Zeta, a Bridge, and a Stratton. So a bunch of different kinds of violins. Each manufacturer makes different choices on their neck width, string spacing at the nut, and string spacing at the bridge, okay? So if I sort this out by nut, if I think about where my string spacing is at the nut, you make all your money in first position, so that's where we spend all our time. Unless you're a first violinist, you're probably screely D'ing way up here. But you play in first position like a lot, okay? So the string width at the nut is very important. So if I sort by the nut, Jordan violins are actually a little bit wider string spacing than you would expect if I just scaled up by 33%. So Jordan's goes, listen, you know, you guys have got big fingers, you're trying to play stuff. You see nothing, you just hear my voice. Lucky you. I'm not that photogenic anyway, don't worry about it. So the Jordan's actually a little bit, it's about 5% wider than you would expect. The Wood Violins Stingray is about 3% wider than you would expect. I don't know, I can see myself. I look good too. No, I don't know. On YouTube, somebody was saying that they're having a hard time seeing me. I'm so sorry, but I hope you can see. I hope you can hear me. That's the important part. Cantini is about 2% wider at the nut than you would expect. And then we get into NS, Aurora, and Realist are all maybe 1% smaller. YEV, Glasser, 3D Various are about 3% narrower. And then we start getting into the dogs where they're getting tighter, okay? So Jordan, Wood Violins, Cantini, NS, Aurora, Realist, YEV, 3D Various, Glasser, they're all within just a couple percent of that 33% wider strings at the nut. They're just within a couple percent of the string spacing you would expect in fourth position. And that's spacing laterally between strings, the distance from an A string to a D string. It's pretty much the same at the nut with all of those manufacturers. However, Zeta, Bridge Violins, and Stratton Violins are all significantly tighter at the bridge, somewhere in the 10% tighter range. The distance between an A string and a D string at the nut on a Zeta, a Bridge, or a Stratton is about 10% closer than it is on a 4-string. Okay? And when we're talking sheer numbers, we're talking like a millimeter. Okay? It's not that much. It's not like you can get on and be like, oh, I can't even play this. But, you know, the millimeters matter. And so in order for them to not have these huge giant necks on these things, if you have small hands and you want to have, one of the things I like about Zetas is they're so fast. Jean-Luc Ponty, ripping fast player. Evan Garr, ripping fast player. Patrick Contreras, ripping fast player. Those guys like that little tighter string spacing because they can get back and forth between strings faster. Okay? So that's sort of what's going on at the nut. At the bridge, it's more or less the same kind of thing. We actually find that at the bridge, Jordan, in order, so Jordan is a little bit narrower than a 4-string at the bridge. Aurora is a little narrower. Stratton starts getting a little tighter. YEV a little tighter. All these are less than 10%. But Jordan, Aurora, Stratton, YEV, NS, Glasser, Wood Violins, they're all less than 10% tighter at the bridge. And then 3D Various, Cantini, Realist, Zeta, and Bridge Violins, they're all a little more than 10% closer at the bridge than they are on a 4-string. So they're a little closer. But even the bridge violin, which is the tightest string spacing, is only about 15% narrower string to string than a 4-string is. So it's not like half the distance or anything. It's like 15%. It's not that much, okay? A little bit. You'll feel it when you're playing. It's a little bit tighter, but not insanely so, okay? And then if we want to look at neck width, how fat is that neck? You know, are you going to be able to get your hand around this thing? And by the way, I know several women that are 5 feet tall or shorter who play 7-string violins and just wreck these things, okay? So if you're like, hey, you know, 7, I can't get my hand around it. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. It's bigger than a 4-string, for sure. But you can get your hand around there. There's people way littler than you that have gotten their hands around it. I mean, little bitty people, like, you're like, hey, nice to meet you. Hey, thanks. Little teeny tiny people playing 7-string violins. It can be done. Now, whether it feels super comfortable to you is something else. A 7 is hard for me to play. I play a 6 all the time. But a 7 is, it's hard for me to play. So if I want to look at neck width, Jordans are still the widest. And then Wood Violins, Aurora, NS, Realist, they're all fairly close. The YEV is a little narrower than you would expect if you just scaled it out. All the way down through Cantini, 3D Various, Glasser, Bridge. Zeta and Stratton, both of those are considerably narrower than you would expect for if I was just scaling this thing up, okay? Zeta and Stratton have pretty narrow necks on these 4 or 5 strings, okay? So if you want a smaller, narrower neck, you're looking at Bridge, Zeta, or Stratton. If you want a big, fat neck, you got big hands, and I need some space between these strings, Jordan, Wood Violins, Aurora, NS, those are good ones to go, okay? We're gonna have all this data up on our website at some point. It'll be in a blog post where we talk about 5-string violins. So if you're interested in seeing these numbers, we're going to publish those at some point. Just keep checking our website, electricviolinshop.com. If you have not been to our website and checked out the blog, Duncan, who's our marketing guy, does a tremendous job of keeping blog posts up there with lots of really cool information. Hey, by the way, some of you guys are new here. You guys have just popped in the last few minutes. Like my shirt? You can buy one on our website now, electricviolinshop.com. You can see the Rockstar Violinist, the podcast here. You like this? You can listen to this and hear some cool violinists. I think we've interviewed 41 different violinists, violists, cellists. Everywhere from like Daniela Padron, who is a straight ahead classical violinist. She just does some really cool stuff with that. Length varies? No, absolutely not. So yeah, the podcast, I'll answer that question in just a second. So the podcast, we've interviewed violinists, violists, cellists, everything from straight ahead classical to heavy metal to EDM to jazz to country to folk music to stuff that I can't even tell you what it is, to some legends, guys like Mark Wood. We interviewed Ned Steinberger, who doesn't even play but invented an instrument that's incredibly different from anything anybody's ever seen. Interviewed Tracy Silverman, was the latest one that came out. Tracy's like one of the OGs, man. He's been doing this a long time. He started in utero. He's not old. Tracy's a really young guy. But he's been doing this, he folded time or something. Tracy's been doing this for like 40 years. It's amazing. Yes, Rockstar Violinist, listen to the podcast, please. It's really awesome. And I don't just say that because I get to edit it. But it's really informative. It's an awesome thing. I was listening to podcasts a lot when I was traveling for my band, and there are so many awesome guitar podcasts out there. And I was like, somebody should do this for violin. I guess that should be me. So, yes, I wanted to hear this podcast before it was a thing. And since it wasn't a thing, I just made it a thing. So listen to the podcast, buy the t-shirt. Question about scale length. No, the scale length is exactly the same on a 4-string as it is on a 5-string. If you were changing scale length, that would be awful. I feel like I'm relatively handy on a violin. I can't play viola for crap. The spacing is different, and I'm second guessing myself. I mean, you know it's different, so you're like trying to make an adjustment, but yeah, I'm never gonna make any money playing the viola because I can't play one in tune reliably. So if they started changing scale length, that would be a horrible, awful, no good thing. I will say there's a caveat on that. The wood violins, because of the geometry of the Viper, the bridge is actually not quite orthogonal, big word. It's not at a 90-degree angle to the strings. And it's because the tailpiece is angled. So actually angle the bridge slightly to make them intonate properly on the lower strings, but you don't really feel that when you're playing unless you get way, way up at the high. Can't find the t-shirt on the website. I don't know. I didn't have to look for one. I just pulled it out of the box. Chris, somebody, if I was looking for the t-shirt on the website, what would I search? Okay. It should be up muy pronto, very soon. If it's not up in the next 30 minutes, we'll make it be. So, yes. Those of you, 20 or 30 of you that are watching live, you may have to wait just a second. Those of you who are watching this ex post facto, it's up. Go to our website and get these shirts. They're awesome. And, yeah, much appreciated, and you guys are so sweet. Shirt is under deals. Awesome. Thank you, Tara, because that's
under deals, and then there's merch.
Because it is a deal. And then there's merch somewhere too. Deals and merch. And
it'll show up in the search overnight once it
oh, so the reason the search didn't, it populates overnight. Yeah, that's why the search bar thing isn't working, but it will work. So if you're watching this and today's not Wednesday, September 20-something, then it's probably there already because I'm talking to the future. Time travel's a thing, just like 5-string violins. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, that's actually going to do it, I think, for me today, unless some awesome questions come in the next few minutes. So that's the deal. 5-string violins, they are a thing. They're legit. They're actually 5-string violins. It's not some weird other name that nobody's ever thought of. It's a violin, okay? It just has 5 strings. It's just 25% cooler than a violin. So yeah, historically, you know, you go back to the, I mean, I played a 14-string viola da gamba about a year ago that had 6 like strings that you would bow, and then 8 sympathetic strings. So like extended range bowed instruments is not a new thing. This isn't something that was just invented last week. It's a legit thing. Historically, it goes back a long time, okay? It can help you get gigs that you couldn't get. Maybe if you're trying to pick up some viola gigs, if you're an improviser and you want to start exploring, especially if you're working around a singer. Here's another thing. You know, the violin, they say it sounds the most like a human voice. Yeah, well, it does, but it's also a lot in the range of, and you're working with a singer, you sort of have, oh, awesome, thank you. So you sort of have one option if you're working with a singer and you only have a 4-string violin and you don't want to be playing the same notes as the singer because they're already singing that note. Please don't be that guy who's just playing on top of the singer. So you only have one option. You can go above the singer. Right, so you can go above the singer, but if you've got an extended range violin, you can get below the singer. You have choices now, right? Because the singer is going to take up some space in most groups somewhere in here. So sort of G string, D string, A string. That's where your singers are going to be. So if you've got a C string, you get below them. Right, so you can get below the singer or you can go above them. So yeah, so you can decide to go up or down, right? And I will say it is a weird thing the first time you look down your bridge and you see a middle string. Like, oh my goodness, a middle string. Your brain might go, oh no. That's your D. D is the middle string. Yeah, I mean, to me, that 5-string just gives you so many more options for trying to avoid other instruments in the mix. With a 4-string violin, you pretty much have the option to go above those instruments, and that's about it. With a 5-string violin, where that 5th string is, an octave below middle C, now all of a sudden you have the option to go below people and maybe put in some texture stuff that you wouldn't have had the option to do with a 4-string violin. It's only a 5th, right? It's not like that huge of an interval, but it makes an amazingly big difference into what your choices are when you're playing because of where that 5th is, okay? So yeah, the history, it's a thing, it's been done before, but with electronics now and the ability to get as much beef as we want out of the bottom end of a 5-string violin with amplification, it's even more of a thing now than it was when it was just acoustic. But because we've got better strings now, 5-string violins are a very usable instrument, even in classical world. Okay, so that's what I've got. If you guys have questions, dump them in the comments. Oh yeah. If you're doing looping and all that, man, throwing down a bass line on a 5-string, coolness. If you've got questions, dump them in the comments section and we will answer those as best we can. I'm going to be gone next week. I'm going to be on a trip in Guatemala. So, well, verles más tarde.